Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to the Cope Life podcast interview series. I'm so excited to be here with my special guest, Katie. Katie Grausam Lee. You are so amazing. I'm so excited to have you here because, like I've, I talk about you behind your back sometimes. It's happened, and and I'm not ashamed to say that you bring this light and this energy that makes me like it gets me excited to talk to you, and I don't care what we're talking about. See, I just want to share that. And so, without further ado, let's get to know you better. Tell me about yourself.
Right on. Thanks, Mr. Gaines. I'm so thrilled to be here, and it's always a joy to talk to you. Um, so, I am Katie Grausam. I'm a tech sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. I joined not right out of high school, but after a miserable 1 year of college. So, I was 19 years old. I'm married with three living children. I lost a son in 2014. He'd be 8 next month, actually. No, next week, excuse me. Whew. Didn't realize it was creeping up that fast. So, let's see. I grew up in central New York, middle of two sisters. So, um, I my oldest sister was diagnosed with ADHD, and something that we knew growing up. Um, and I started out really, really amazing in school. And as the years progressed, I struggled more and more. And at the age of 30, while I was in the Air Force, I ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD, and it made a lot of sense getting that diagnosis. Um, but I think going undiagnosed for so long really impacted my relationships and my self confidence and my whole entire view of myself, and what I thought I was capable of and wasn't capable of. So something I discovered late in life that really, really informed how I lived my life and where I thought my life was going to go. And getting that diagnosis and seeking treatment and working through all of that has completely changed the way I approach my career and my life and my relationships. Um, as does kind of everything I had gone through leading up to that. Um, so yeah, I kind of got in a little deep for the intro, but that's me.
I'm okay
Hi.
with that. I'm okay with that. Yeah, let's get right into it. And one thing you said, of course, was that your sister was diagnosed with ADHD. And so I have a couple questions. My question is a couple of them. First of all, how old was she when she was diagnosed? And how old were you? And then after that, well, go ahead, answer that, and then I'm gonna get into the next question.
Yeah, sure thing. So she was diagnosed really, really young. I think when my mom realized that having a caffeinated soda would calm her down instead of wind her up, it was like, oh, hey, that's not typical. And she was already in special education for other things. And so I think that kind of helped guide the diagnosis and the treatment earlier on in elementary school. Whereas I did well enough in school to still get A's and B's and scrape by. The report cards always had joy to have in class, needs to apply herself. And so I got this sense that I just wasn't trying hard enough. And if I could just try harder and be more organized, then I'd be able to do anything. Um, but maybe I was just lazy or something. And so I was not diagnosed until I sought diagnosis for my oldest daughter. And as we're in therapy and the therapist is trying to help me figure out strategies to help my daughter, I was like, oh, that's super, but this is all stuff that I can barely manage myself. Keeping a strict schedule and keeping things organized and sorted and really like neatly laid out, it was all things that I just didn't think I was capable of. And so the therapist kind of suggested, oh, well, you said your sister has ADHD. Do you maybe also have ADHD? So that's what led me to finally seek treatment for myself.
So when you were younger and you saw your sister getting help for ADHD, did you ever look at the help she was getting and think, wow, I could use some of that, or it's not fair that she's getting help and I'm not?
I don't think so. It never really crossed my mind that I might even have it because hey, I was good in school. I was good at test taking and I could sit there in class and read a book. Oh, shoot, I could read books for hours and hours and hours. I could focus on all sorts of things, not the things I was supposed to be focusing on, but I could focus like nobody's business. But that's a common thing that I see, especially in women and women who are really bright, is that we don't fit the typical what's now called hyperactive type ADHD bill, where we're bouncing off the walls and disrupting everything. And so treatment tends to be geared toward the people who are more disruptive and more obviously ADHD. Whereas for me, most of it is up here. This is where all of that messy clutter, not messy, it's organized in a very different way than I would sometimes like. But that's where all of my struggle occurs. It's all internal, and so it's not visible to everybody else, and it's a lot harder to pinpoint if you don't know what to look for.
Well, so one thing I want to get your opinion on this. When I say that women generally are diagnosed later with ADHD, we just assume that it's a you problem, not an ADHD. It's like what was said to you. What do you think about that?
I've read exactly the same thing. I think it's slowly getting better. I'm hearing more and more stories of, and I think part of it is probably all of these women and mothers who are being diagnosed later in life and looking at their kids and saying, hey, this matches what they're experiencing, or the other way around, where folks like teachers and educators and doctors are noticing the symptoms in girls more often because they're more educated about what those symptoms look like in women, because a lot of it is this intense need to please and the kind of spacey, it's what's called inattentive type ADHD, where if something does not really grab your interest, then you space out and your mind wanders, or you have trouble paying attention in conversations, or like all of that hyperactivity that's more internal is like, oh, somebody said something, now I have to contribute, and you jump in and you interrupt, or you have trouble interacting with your peers a little bit. But yeah, I think it's getting better. I think we still have a long
Yes.
way to go.
So when you talk about those, just the couple different things you talked about, your mind wandering, certain issues maybe with social interaction. How prevalent were those in your life, like in elementary school or middle school, and how did that impact your self worth?
Oh yeah. I'm glad you asked that, because it took a lot of looking back to see where it was prevalent, but I think the first time I noticed really seeing it was it as early as elementary school. So like third, fourth grade, I think, is when I started to struggle with the work that wasn't exciting and fun to me. And that's where I distinctly remember hearing a lot of, you just need to be more organized. And that always baffled me because I'm like, oh, I'm trying. I don't know how. And people would try to help me start organizational systems and it would fall apart in like a day or two. And it's just, I started to think, well, everybody acts like this is so easy. Why can't I do this why it's so hard for me. There must be something wrong with me and something wrong in my head. And like, the spaciness contributed to a lot of me questioning my own experiences and memory, and left me kind of wide open for some gaslighting and emotional abuse later in life. And then friendships, yeah, were difficult until I would say around like 7th or 8th grade, when I found a group of similarly also diagnosed late in life with ADHD, a similar girl that I could relate to, that didn't think I was a big weirdo or, you know, super strange and awkward to be around.
You know, you've mentioned a couple times, just be organized. And so tell me what you think about this analogy. When I say to someone with ADHD, just get organized, that's the same as saying to someone who's depressed, just be happy.
Yeah.
What do you think?
And I may as well just grow wings and become a bird. Like, it's I could fly with the help of a lot of great technology. And so with the help of therapy and medication, I was able to finally get organized. I now have like fantastic, colorful notebooks with schedules and to-do lists, and I actually get through my to-do lists, and I don't lose my to-do lists anymore, because it was this constant stream of, oh, we use sticky notes, make to-do lists. I'm like, yeah, that's great. I lose them immediately. Like, it's just gone. I don't know what happened to it. I would love it if I did. And that's been kind of the struggle with my daughter, is to get folks on board with, hey, you know, medication doesn't even have to be permanent. I haven't taken mine in a couple of months, partly because I just PCS'd, and finding a new doctor hasn't been at the top of my list. It should be. I need to prioritize my mental well-being. I'm learning.
Okay,
It's a
I
process.
agree.
But yeah, all the just statements don't take into account that people's brains work completely differently. So just like, yeah, telling a depressed person to just exercise more and go for a walk doesn't account for all of the mental roadblocks that get in the way of that when you're deep into depression or deep into any sort of mental health issue or physical health too.
Yeah, so I was thinking this, and then you just mentioned physical health. I was thinking about the idea of people who, and I'm sure you've heard this term, just enough to be dangerous. Because there's things that we hear, right? So if you're depressed, you have this chemical imbalance, whatever, and the mind body connection will help you. So just go for a walk. And it's like, that's just not a cure. And even based on what you're saying, I'll reframe it by saying that those one liners don't account for the person that you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't account for who you are as a person. So what I'm wondering is, I keep going back to childhood because obviously, I mean, that impacts us across the lifespan. So how do you feel when you look back on the supports that you did or did not get from family members while you were younger?
That's rough. I love my parents dearly, and I think they were doing the best they could with the information they had. It was kind of raised to them early on that I might have ADHD, but there were so many other factors in place that I think it kind of washed over, like, oh, well, you know, she has kind of a hard time sometimes, but she's not like completely off the rails. You know, she's sleeping fine and she's eating fine and she's doing well in school and doing well on the test, and she's learning and she's growing and progressing. And so I think they didn't really see it as much of an issue. And so there was a lot of internal frustration with being told I need to stop losing my things and I need to be more organized. And I need to keep my room tidy and maybe stop reading all the way through class, especially when they're books that aren't related to class. And I know they were trying to help me get through school and do well and succeed, but I also am fairly certain at least one of my parents probably also has ADHD, but in their generation, you just didn't. It just wasn't really recognized as a thing. I think even when my older sister was diagnosed, it was still fairly new and not researched, and they only had a couple of treatment options and they weren't ideal. So I think they supported me the best way they could with the tools they had at the time. And all of the coping mechanisms that I had to learn along the way have in the end been helpful for me in helping my daughter and helping her recognize all of the struggles and helping me to understand what she's going through. And so blessing and a curse, not being treated and not having maybe some of the supports that I could have led to some self-worth issues and to a lot of self-doubt, but it also led to who I am today. And so
Right.
I can't be too mad about it, because I get it.
I absolutely love the way that you bring empathy and grace to talking about your parents. I love that. I think it's very hard to do for a lot of people, because things should have been different. They should have done something different, but that's the same as someone telling you that you should have done something. You know how it feels to be told that. And so you take the perspective of, if I'm going to say that about someone else, I'm going to include empathy, grace, and gratitude in my words. I so appreciate that about you. I think it's beautiful for you to take that perspective.
I got my mom to thank for that. She always told me, parents are doing the best they can with what they grew up with and trying to be better than the generation before them. And so, I've learned a whole awful lot of good from my parents, and then I want to build on that. And I hope that my kids one day learn from all the stuff that I screwed up and do even better.
I love it because I think about, and then you can tell me what you think about this, but I think about how, our parents back in those days, a whole generation ago, you did not admit that your children had any kind of issues. Like the way that you describe your sister, I almost feel like they were forced to do that, and maybe there was some sense of self-doubt among them, and maybe that's a barrier to helping you, because they're just like, there's a self-doubt as a parent as well.
I think with my older sister, so she's got a slew of developmental disabilities, and so I think just my guess would be that they were overwhelmed with all of the fighting they had to do for her, because disability services are not in great shape everywhere. We were in the best school district that they could find to get the best supports in place for her. We didn't really know if she was ever going to live in an independent life, but they did such an incredible job of making sure she had the care she needed, that she's living in an apartment now and has a disability services team that comes in periodically to help her out with life tasks and stuff. But she's done so much more than we ever thought would be possible, and it's because of their hard work. So I imagine there was probably doubt along the way. Are we doing the most that we can? Are we doing the best we can for her and for all the girls? And, I think they did. I think they did their best, and they did a lot of hard work. So I'm going to get all teary now.
And I love it. Like I feel like I could say anything to you right now, and you're just gonna add the empathy, you're gonna add the positivity. Like you really are this shining light that people need in their life, including me. Like that's why I'm so excited to talk to you. Um, one thing I want to ask you though is about when you were in school and you got the A's and B's, and it was like you were doing good enough. But from everyone else's perspective, you were doing good enough and you should try harder. But maybe from your perspective, you were working 3 times as hard just to be good enough.
And so I always had kind of mixed feelings about that, because when it came to like test taking, easy peasy. I could take tests all day long and do fantastic in school. And so I felt like I was really lucky there, because so many people struggle with test taking, and I never had trouble with that. It 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 didn't hit me until probably high school that I struggled to complete longer assignments. um, and that's where I got a lot of the, you need to apply yourself. Like, why aren't you getting homework done if the tests are so easy? The homework should be a piece of cake because it's just practice. And I would get so frustrated because, homework's supposed to be done at the end of the day. And I had spent the entire day putting all of my mental effort into like, okay, I'm at school. I will be present at school. I won't read my books. I won't knit a scarf. I did end up knitting scarves. I knit a lot of hats and sweaters. Well, crocheted. I did a lot of crafting in school. My teachers accepted it eventually
Wow.
when I did good on the tests. But it all sort of, it started to fall apart probably my senior year. I distinctly remember being told that if I did not turn in my like 7 unfinished lab reports for science, then I couldn't take the final exam and I would fail science that year. And so I remember like the very last minute, at the very end, the very deadline, pushing a stack of finished lab reports under my science teacher's door because I knew that I had to get them in or I was going to fail. And so I needed that sort of adrenaline rush and pressure to finally get it done, because it was boring and it was tedious and I already passed the test. So why should I be doing this lab report?
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense to me. I have to tell you that. So what I wonder is, were there times where people said to you something like, why don't you do this? Why haven't you done this? What's wrong with you? And your thought in your brain was, I don't know.
Oh, all the time. Why can't you be more organized? I wish I could tell you. Why am I still sitting here on this couch when I know I should go for a run and I know I should do the laundry and I know I need to do dishes? Like, I just am stuck. And it's the wildest thing to try to explain, because it's like, and I found that fellow people with ADHD understand perfectly, and other people are like, what are you talking about? Because I can sit there and in my head I'm like, I need to do this, I need to just get up. Okay, we're getting up now. And then I'm still sitting there and I'm like, okay, what's happening? Why am I stuck? Why am I still not moving? Like, there's a weird like disconnect between my brain and my body and what I know I need to do, and then what I'm actually able to initiate.
So would you give yourself, maybe I'm telling on myself here. So do you like give yourself deadlines and then you watch the deadline come and go? At
Oh yeah.
11:30, I'm going to get up and do this. And then, yeah.
Yeah. And it's crazy because people will tell me, oh, you just need to like set a reward for yourself. I'm like, okay, but now Katie knows that future Katie doesn't have to wait for the reward. And so I just, yeah, oh, I can have a cookie when I finish the laundry. And my brain's like, oh, but you could just have a cookie right now. Like, what's actually stopping you from having a cookie right this second?
I feel like I'm relating too much to all of it. I really am, because you set that timer. It's in your head at 11:30. I'm going to do this. Then you look, hey, it's 11:32. Busted that suspense.
Maybe tomorrow.
And then I think about what you're saying about school, because I feel like I'll say this. I've heard before that how you view yourself like from 13 to 15 years old, you take into adulthood. And
Oh
I'll
yeah.
and so I'll say about me, I thought I was really chubby at that age, right? Because after that age, I got taller, right? Just had a growth spurt. But before the growth spurt, I was like the fat kid. And so then I still thought I was a fat kid when I was a grown man weighing 130 pounds. I still thought of
So it does, and I've heard friends who were really overweight and lose all that weight and keep it off for years and decades, still internally see themselves as like that fat person. And so in my head, I am still awkward and spacey and unorganized, and I talk too much and I don't really know what's going on. And so it's been really wild the last few years to find myself in leadership positions and talking in front of groups and getting feedback that, wow, you really know what you're doing. You're really good at this. And I'm like, no. It's hard to reconcile who I am now against that mental image that I still have of myself, and that mental image of myself as spacey and disorganized and scattered and irresponsible kind of landed me in a real unfortunate relationship dynamic, because I had ended up with somebody who sort of preyed on that and used that to discredit me and spin their own narrative about who I was and how competent or incompetent I was. So, yeah.
so was that more I kind of want to be clear on this, based kind of on a conversation I had earlier this morning with some people, but there's a difference between maybe a bad relationship, a toxic relationship, and an abusive relationship.
And so it took me a long time to kind of work through those different stages. I started out thinking, oh, this is just a fundamental mismatch. We're just not good for each other. To kind of, as the relationship progressed, I was like, oh, this is very unhealthy. I still don't think I ever applied toxic, even though it probably was. But it was definitely not healthy. And then toward the end, it got to the point where I think it was emotionally abusive. I was being told that I was making things up and misremembering conversations, and got to the point where I didn't trust myself to do anything. I was told that I couldn't understand finances and couldn't be trusted with financial things, that I was not going to promote. And so why bother even trying? I did spite promote after my divorce. This is nothing quite so motivating as a little bit of spite.
I love it.
I hate to say that. This is a terrible way to think, but that's what got me ranked up that year. um, and so I say that it kind of, all of that self-worth stuff was preyed upon because I already thought that maybe my memory wasn't great and that I was prone to missing things in conversations or forgetting things or losing things. And so that was sort of compounded by living day to day with somebody who said, oh, you don't remember that conversation correctly. I never said that. I never did that. You misread that. It was always something I was doing wrong. And so after I lost my child in 2014, I was in therapy, and the therapist the first day asked what I wanted to talk about. And the grief was not the first thing that came to mind. It was, I need to figure out how to communicate better, because obviously I'm not communicating effectively because something is not getting through, and my spouse and I just are completely at odds, and I need to figure out how to communicate better. And so a lot of therapy later, I was not, turns out, communicating horribly and effectively, and kind of eventually came to the realization that my marriage was not healthy, and that was not a way that I wanted my daughters to grow up, thinking that that was what they could expect out of a relationship as an adult. I thought they deserved better and healthier and love and mutual respect. And that's not what they were seeing modeled for them.
So you had these thoughts, and you were going through this thought process while in therapy after losing your child.
Yeah.
I just want to hear you tell me, whatever you're comfortable with.
Mhm.
But that sounds excruciating.
It was a rough time. Okay.
It's okay. Well, let's breathe.
Yeah, so lost our child, and so at 20 weeks pregnant, I very suddenly started bleeding, and didn't really know why. I ended up in and out of the hospital for 3 weeks trying to keep me pregnant. Our son ended up born at 23 weeks and was too small for the NICU. And my kind of, I'm an uncomfortable laugher. So when I start to get sad, if I don't want to cry, I laugh.
Understood.
And so that was obviously rough, to kind of feel like your body failed you. And after I'd had 2 healthy pregnancies, why did this one not stay? And my spouse at the time said, well, maybe it's your body. Maybe you just can't be pregnant with boys. And I was mad. Like, I expected to be sad, but I was angry because, like, how dare you? I have made it through 2 perfectly healthy pregnancies, and I did my best. And sometimes shit just doesn't work, and you don't know why, and you don't have answers, and that's just life. It's just crappy sometimes, and it's nobody's fault, and nobody did anything wrong. It just sometimes sucks. And so to be blamed for that when I was already having a hard time was really infuriating. And I realized very quickly, like, I could never do this again. I could never be pregnant and go through all of the stress of another pregnancy after this with this man. And that kind of, like, things weren't great before that. Things were going downhill already, but that kind of snowballed it. Like, he was like, well, we can have another if you want. And I didn't. And I wanted another baby, but I knew that I couldn't go through that again with somebody who was so unsupportive. And so, like, for, after you have a baby, you need to have follow-up appointments to make sure you're healing okay. And nothing was retained, and you're not going to bleed out suddenly out of nowhere. And I was anxious going back to that hospital that I had just spent 3 weeks in and lost my son in. And God, it couldn't have been, but maybe a month later, I was expressing this anxiety, and he told me that I couldn't let this affect me forever. And that is something I learned you do not say to somebody who is grieving. And it was really frustrating because I knew he had to be grieving too, but he seemed to be doing it with anger and refused to go see any sort of counselor or anything like that. And so I was doing it not alone. I won't say alone because I had amazing friends who were there, kind of
Take your
I
time.
had friends kind of forcing themselves into my life, saying, hey, I'm here and I'm going to help you. And I know you suck at asking for help and accepting help. So they sort of brute forced the help on me and the love. There was some brute force love going on there. And so I had one friend waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym with me because she knew I needed to get out of the house and do something physical. That was a rough year.
Yeah, I just, you tell me this, and you know, part of me is mad at him too. You know, it was, I don't know what year that was, but it's news to me, and so yeah, it kind of makes me mad right now. Like, are you serious? Wow. Yeah,
This
it's
was back in 2014, so a lot has happened since then.
I just I cannot I can't even imagine. I don't know how many people have told you I know how you feel, but I'm telling you I cannot imagine. Like,
And that's the weird thing with grief is like you can feel grief and know that your grief is nothing like somebody else's. And so it taught me a lot about what to do and say and what not to do and say when somebody is expecting or has lost a child. It's a weird sort of lesson tangent. I used to think nothing of it when people would ask, oh, is this your first pregnancy or is this your first kid? How many kids have you had? How many times have you been pregnant? And there's just a tiny bit of nuance to those questions that really punches you in the gut once you've experienced a loss. And so I have 3 girls now. And when I was pregnant with my youngest, people would see the other 2 girls and be like, oh, are you hoping for a boy this time? Are you hoping you finally get a boy? And it, depending on how well I knew them and how kind of cranky and snitty I was feeling that day, I would give them all or some or none of the truth. The answers would range from, I love all my girls, to, hey, I had a son, he died. And it's a harsh way of saying it, but
it's the truth.
Yeah.
It's the
And
truth.
so it forced me to rethink how I frame questions about people's families. So hey, yeah, you learn from even the shittiest things, I guess.
Yeah, and it's like you're in a position where you had to choose to learn, right?
Yeah.
And part of the learning was you learning that. I'll tell you this. My brother said to me, I don't know how many people I've said this to, but my brother has said to me a long time ago, at some point in time after you turn 30, and for you, I think it was before 30, but he said, at some point in time after you turn 30, you're going to wake up, you're going to look around, and you're going to say, I ain't putting up with this shit no more. And it's one thing to say it and realize it. It's another thing to make the decision. And so can you kind of take us through the decision making process, whether and the decision making process might have been a 3-year process, right? I don't know. But at some point you were like, I've decided I'm going to have a better life than this.
I think it was actually a quick process once I decided, because I had tried to like change myself to make things work. And even in therapy, I went in with the goal of fixing myself to make myself a better spouse and a better communicator, to try to fix things. But then I realized I was putting in all this effort and being met with, well, that's fine, but I am who I am and I'm not going to change. And if you don't like it, you can leave. And I think that phrase is what did it. I was like, oh, well, I don't like it. And now I have your permission. If I don't like it, I can leave. So that's what I'm going to do. You've made your choice. And now it's time for me to make mine. It still took a lot of support from my hype ladies in the wings. And my therapist saying, is this how you want your daughters to, is this the kind of relationships you want them to have? Is this the kind of person you want them to end up with? Because this is what you're teaching them.
Yes.
And I couldn't do it for me. But I could do it for my kids. And when my hype girl, Megan, was like, hey, you deserve better than this. Like, you don't have to be miserable. You can be happy.
Yes.
And, you know, you're strong and you're capable and you can pay your own bills and live on your own. Like, it's a thing you are capable of. And I'm here and I'm going to help you and I'm going to watch your kids while you have to have this hard conversation. And my husband and I are going to help take care of your kids when you're going to therapy. And my husband and his boys are going to come with their truck and help you move your stuff when you move out of the house. Like, I don't know if I could have done it without the support from my friends. And from my family not saying, I told you so. Because when I told my parents, I was like, oh, they're going to say, I told you so. And they're going to be so upset. And they told me not to get married and blah, blah. But they were just like, you've got this, you're strong and you can do it. How can we help you? You know, and all of that support kind of rallied around me. So I talk about my friend hyping me up and telling me I was strong and able to do that. And something that I always tell people when they're talking down about themselves is something my therapist told me. And it was, talk to yourself like you would talk to one of your friends. When you're hyping your friend up, you don't say, oh, you kind of suck. You're not very good at this. You're not going to make it. You're not going to promote. You can't be a leader. That's crazy. Your friends don't say that shit to you. They're like, yes, you've got this and I'm proud of you. And so it's taking a lot of mental rewiring to try to talk to myself like my hype man would talk to me. But I try to make sure I tell other people that too. Like, hey, no, be your hype man.
I love it. I tell people all the time, if you can't say something kind to yourself, keep practicing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so at what point did you realize, we'll say at this point you have moved out, you still got your friends, you still got their love and support. And at what point, I want to know at what point, and then how did it feel when you came to the realization, I got this?
Oh, man. That was a process. So like the moving out and finding a house, that was pretty easy. And then like switching all my bills and my accounts over, I was like, oh, hey, I can pay my own bills. I'm an adult. I can do this. I don't need anybody to support me. Like, I did just fine the first year I was pregnant. I was doing shit by myself. I can do it again with 2 toddlers. um, and so I think that part came easier than I made the right choice for my kids. That was kind of a back and forth because there were days where I was stressed and on edge and my temper was short and I was tired. And like the parenting by myself I could do, but kind of everything piling on, and then I would snap at them, and that was so hard because I'm like, oh, they deserve better and I need a little bit of space or time. But I started to learn that even though they were toddlers, they kind of at some level got it, I guess. And so if I would snap, I would then go back to them and say, hey, I'm sorry. You don't deserve to be yelled at. And mommy was stressed, but that was no excuse. And I'm sorry. And I love you. And I'm trying to be more patient. And God, we're what, 7 or 8 years out from that now? And I have 2 incredible tween girls who will, when they've snapped or argued or just been a turd, as preteen girls do sometimes, they'll come back later unprompted and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, mommy. I was hangry, or I was tired, or I don't know what was up, but I'm sorry I yelled." So it's years on kind of validation, I guess, that maybe I did right.
I was just thinking that, this is evidence that you did great. The thing is children, from day one. When I say day one, I mean literally the day they're born, they begin to learn empathy. And the empathy that they learn when they're born is just feeling your heartbeat when they're against your chest, or feeling your chest as you're breathing. And so their body's trying to mimic that. And so as they were toddlers and you were having rough days, and then you came back and you apologized or whatever, you kept that connection strong, and they were able to be empathetic because from the moment they were born, you loved them with your whole heart, and they knew that. They couldn't say it at the age of 2. I can't say my mommy loved me this way, but they felt it. And then it's one thing to feel that love. It's another thing for them to learn from you what accountability is. And so when we can integrate empathy with accountability, then we can raise great, amazing young women like you have.
Thank
And you
you.
can take credit for that. I'm cool with that. Yeah.
My current husband deserves a lot of credit, because when I start getting snippy and impatient, he is far and away the more patient of us.
That's good. That's good though, man. I'm happy for you that things are working out. You've been through so much, and you remind me of myself, right? And we talked about this, just yesterday. We talked about this, how learning to go from talking about self-talk, learning to go from I'm too emotional to I'm emotional, and accepting that. I'm too sensitive to I'm not too sensitive. I'm a sensitive person, and I can accept that. So can you kind of talk about that learning process of just learning to accept who you are? This isn't good or bad. This is who I am. Let's talk about that self-acceptance.
Yeah, I love that we talked about this yesterday, because it's something that's kind of gone through my mind the last probably year or two. So I was in a leadership position that dealt with a lot of uh, airmen going through shit, and it gets emotional and it's hard, and um, I have to kind of mentally hype myself up, because I'm a crier, and I'm like a happy crier, and I'm a sad crier, and I'm an angry crier, and a frustrated crier. And like in the military, you don't cry at work like that. It feels weird, but I think that we need some more of that emotional intensity, because you're not the only one crying at your desk. I promise you. Like,
That's
I
true. So
definitely
true.
used to. So when I was going through the loss of my child or my marriage falling apart, I'd be walking down the hall and just suddenly like, ah, here are the tears, and I would duck into a bathroom and like sniffle and cry in the bathroom stall, or I'd be like head down at my cubicle wiping away the tears. But I was
I've
not
been
the
there.
only one going through that crap, and I felt so alone. And now I try to talk about it, at least. Like, yeah, I'm a crier. I know that. It's fine. I feel things very intensely. I feel sadness and stress very intensely. But that means I also feel joy very intensely. So intensely I cry. So that's why. But like, what? It's kind of incredible to be so happy that you're crying. I don't know if a lot of people experience that. And so, shit, I'm going to embrace it.
I love it. I love it so much. I love it so much. Yeah, I've been there. I've been there. I didn't do it like you did. I've been at a point where sitting in my car, like, let me clean all this up before I walk in the front door. But and so many of us have been there, right? And then you find out after the fact, you find out like, oh, last week this happened, 3 weeks this happened, 2 months ago this happened, and you're wondering, why didn't you say anything? How did you get through all that alone? And you're providing the kind of leadership where they don't have to do it alone. You're providing that leadership where, hey, you can come sit at my desk and cry. It's okay.
Yeah, and so it's been really incredible. So when I was on my last flight, and before I stepped into flight leadership and then continued it after I was leading the flight, I would occasionally tell parts of my story to the flight as a whole, whether it was about my ADHD diagnosis and all of the crap that came with that, because the mental health and the stigma in the military is still very real. It's real in the rest of the world too. And so sharing with them that, hey, it's not the end of the world to have a diagnosis of a mental health issue of some sort. Like, we got bum knees all over the place. We got some brains that need some help too. It's fine.
Very true.
Or telling the story of my loss. And after sharing these stories, I had handfuls of airmen coming up to me and sharing, hey, you know, I think I have ADHD as well, but I've been afraid to go to behavioral health because I thought I would get, you know, booted or not be able to do my job. And thank you for, you know, being brave. Or, hey, I see you use colored pens too. That's also how my ADHD brain organizes things on paper. And just it sort of opened the floor for more conversation and more vulnerability. And I know I'm prone to oversharing sometimes, so you can be probably too vulnerable, I guess. I'm sure there's a balance in there, but I will take it, because if it even opens the floor for one person to not feel so alone, then that's all I can ask for. And it's been incredible kind of seeing those floodgates open. And once you do that for one person, like, that triggers a chain reaction and others feel more comfortable sharing. I got comfortable sharing my ADHD diagnosis after I heard a first sergeant share her ADHD diagnosis. And it was like, oh, whoa,
Yeah.
like, you can have ADHD and be a first sergeant and be a good one and successful. That was news to me, and it sort of changed the way I envisioned the rest of my career going. So yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible when you think about just the impact. I always say you can't measure your impact. You would like to, but you can't. And for example, this one first sergeant told the story and you heard it, so you become vulnerable. And there's some 19 or 20-year-old who heard it, who heard from you.
Yep.
And in a few years from now, that 19-year-old airman first class is going to be a lieutenant colonel, is going to be a squadron commander, and is going to be bringing vulnerability to an entire organization because that airman worked for you.
Yeah.
So
It's
your
it's so
truth is a
incredible to think
lifesaver.
about.
You haven't thought of it like that, but your truth is a lifesaver, and I appreciate you so much.
Thank
You're
you.
absolutely incredible. So one thing I want to ask you, and because I know you got to go soon. For anyone who's watching and doesn't know this, but Katie's in Hawaii. I don't understand time. I assume it's 3 a.m, something like that. But I know
It's
you have
almost
to.
7.
Okay, I know you have to go to work soon, so because man, I could sit here and talk with you all day long about so many things. But so I want to ask you kind of it's a hard topic, but I think it's necessary, about your opinion on how Air Force leadership handles airmen who have miscarriages.
Um,
You can pass if you want. You can say
no, I think it's important, and I think how they handle it kind of depends on what they've experienced in their lives. And so overall, I think we have a tendency to not want to talk about it because we don't want to make an airman uncomfortable.
yes.
And I can only speak for me, because I know not everybody wants to talk about it or wants to be uncomfortable. I felt alone, like really, really alone and kind of ignored. And it was just that my leadership didn't want me to feel pressured to talk. Um, but I kind of wish they would have at least asked how I was holding up, and whether I was, you know, talking with somebody or whether I needed resources. Because I think that just would have opened the door for me to talk if I wanted to. And so I don't think there's a perfect way to fix that. I think we're taking good steps in offering. I think they've recently changed the leave policy for experiencing pregnancy losses. You used to only get maternity leave if your child was born alive and subsequently died. And I think they've changed that policy recently. And I know there's some pushes to get bereavement leave in place. I need to update myself on all the leave policies because there's a lot has changed. But I think we're taking good steps. I think it's hard. It's a hard topic, even not in the military. And I think everybody handles things so differently that there's not a perfect answer and a perfect solution, but to keep the communication floors open as much as possible.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, even from the beginning of our conversation, you're the one that will turn things positive, and I appreciate that. I'm glad that steps are being made to be more supportive and apply really just effort to have more connection, right? But I want to ask you one last question. So my question is, if there is someone watching this in the military who feels alone and feel like they have some kind of mental health issue or situation where there's ADHD or something else, what would you like to tell that person?
Oh man. Go to behavioral health. Worry about career implications later because you were a human before you were an airman and you have to take care of that human because uniform or no uniform, like you have to take it off someday. It is not forever. And you have to take care of yourself and do so before you're completely a sobbing heap on the floor. If you're a sobbing heap on the floor, like now is the time to get help. I promise you. But even if you're not there yet, like go get help and, share that if you can. Share how getting help has impacted you, but get help for yourself first. You can't take care of other people and you can't take care of your mission if you are not mentally well. And there's no way around that.
Very true, very true. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, because it's common. It's common, and it's one of those things where you don't get help until you're broken quite often.
Yeah, and we do it with our bodies too. It took my knee being in a lot of pain before I went to the doctor and said, "Hey, I think something's wrong with my knee." Had I gone when I fell the first time and injured it initially, then I think I'd have been in a lot better shape and not with a chronic knee problem. It's the same with your brain. You have to take care of your brain. It is another part of your body.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for this, for your time, for coming here. I've said it before that you have this energy, and you just have this big heart, and I'm grateful for every conversation we have. And
Thank you,
so,
Miss Haynes. I'm grateful for our conversations too.
so with that said, I'm just gonna say, is there any last words you'd like to say before we end the broadcast?
I already said it, but be
All
your
right.
hype man. Talk to yourself the way you would hype up your friends. I
I
know
love
some people banter with their friends, but if you're seriously hyping somebody up, that's the way you need to talk to you. And it takes practice, but it is worth the practice. You deserve to be hyped up.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Be your own hype man, hype woman, hype best friend. Bring the hype. Bring the hype to your own life,
Yeah,
because you deserve it. I love it. Thank you so much, Katie. We're gonna do this again sometime. I don't know when, but we'll figure it out.
right on. Sounds
And,
great.
and thank you for everyone who watched, whether you're watching live or you're gonna watch it later on YouTube or the replay. Thank you everyone for who watched. Thank you, Katie, for being here, and I will see all of you later.
Bye. Thank you.